At Orion International Airport, everything gleams polished floors, mirrored glass, and the quiet hum of wealth. Flight 481 to Seattle is boarding, in first class. The champagne is chilled. The leather reclines whisper softly, and every smile hides a hierarchy no one admits exists. Among the tailored suits and silver watches sits a woman in worn jeans, white sneakers, and a navy hoodie. She doesn't look like she belongs here, at least. That's what they think. Her name is Ava Morgan, 35. Calm eyes, steady breath. No one knows that behind those quiet eyes lies the mind that built Novacore Technologies, a billion-dollar empire. No one knows that. As of yesterday, she owns 70% of Aurora Air, the very airline they're flying on. But Ava didn't come here for luxury. She came to see what happens when power doesn't wear its uniform. And soon, she'll learn that prejudice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles, pours champagne, and looks away. When the captain himself steps out of the cockpit to question her place, a single moment will shatter that silence. A slap, a stunned cabin, and a truth that will turn the entire system upside down. Because sometimes, the person they try to humble is the one who holds their future in her hands. If you believe that dignity speaks louder than anger, and that true justice doesn't need to scream, stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories where silence becomes the voice of power. Now, let's begin. Orion International Airport was waking up. Not loudly, not with the frenzy of low-cost terminals, but in the hush of polished shoes, muted boarding calls, and the faint scent of espresso drifting through the glass halls. The kind of place where power didn't shout. It signed, nodded, and walked away before anyone could catch its face. At Gate 12, Flight 481 to Seattle was boarding. A business route, predictable faces, familiar briefcases, quiet hierarchy, and among them, there was a woman in a navy hoodie, jeans faded from years of wear, white sneakers that once gleamed but now held the color of travel and time. Her name, though, no one there seemed to care to know. It was Ava Morgan. She moved with the unhurried grace of someone who had nothing to prove. Her carry-on was light, her steps precise. To most, she looked like a tech contractor or a teacher on conference travel, but Ava Morgan was neither. She was the founder and CEO of Novacore Technologies, a company born in a one-bedroom apartment 12 years ago and now valued in billions. Yesterday, just 24 hours earlier, she had signed the final acquisition papers that made Novacore Holdings the majority owner of Aurora Air, the very airline operating Flight 481. 70% control. But that wasn't public yet. Ava hadn't told anyone, not even her family, because this trip wasn't about celebration. It was about seeing her new company from the bottom up, from the aisle seat. The queue, the overlooked angle of a customer without a name tag. She believed in one simple rule. You can't reform a system you've never been small in. So, when her assistant had offered to arrange a corporate flight, Ava refused. No suits, no headlines, just a seat. She said she'd asked for economy class, the middle of the crowd, as she called it, where service wasn't curated, for prestige, but Aurora Air's system, automated and self-assured, recognized her as a platinum-tier traveler from past bookings. It had upgraded her automatically to first class. She had smiled when she saw the email. "So that's how equality ends," she murmured, "with an algorithm that thinks it's being kind." Ava didn't ask her assistant to change it. She wanted to observe the other side too, the top tier, where hospitality turned into hierarchy. The terminal speakers hummed first-class passengers for Flight 481 may now board. Ava joined the line. In front of her, a man in a gray suit adjusted his cufflinks, impatient with the slowness of the scanner. Behind her, a woman whispered into her phone about a merger, her tone laced with urgency. No one looked at Ava, or perhaps they did. But in that quick way, people assess and dismiss the silent arithmetic of social worth. She handed her digital boarding pass to the attendant. The scanner blinked green. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Morgan," the attendant said, with that trained smile that never quite reached the eyes. Inside, the first-class cabin was a small theater of control. 12 seats arranged like thrones, cream leather, brushed steel, and champagne flutes waiting in precise rows. Every detail whispered, "You belong here if you look like it." Ava's seat was 2A, by the window. She placed her bag under the seat and folded her hoodie neatly across her lap. She felt the stairs before she saw them. 2 men in 1A and 1B, business suits sharp enough to cut, gave her that slow, polite smile reserved for the unfamiliar. A woman across the aisle glanced at Ava's sneakers, then looked away. Nothing loud, just soft exclusion. Ava opened her tablet. Her notes page was titled Aurora Air Ground Truth. She began typing short lines. Check-in signage unclear, staff polite, tone shifts by attire, cabin ambiance excellent, but warmth selective. The crew moved about efficiently. One attendant, Elliot Ward, a young man with a smooth voice and perfect posture, handed champagne to the front row. He hesitated slightly at Ava's seat just long enough for her to notice. Then, as if uncertain, he offered a bottle of water instead. "Would you like sparkling or still, ma'am?" "Still is fine," Ava said gently, but he didn't return right away. From the cockpit, Captain Richard Bolton surveyed the cabin feed, 58 years old, 30 years in uniform. His medals gleamed even when the light didn't. He was the kind of man who believed he was the airline that his uniform carried not just authority, but identity. "Elliot," he said over the intercom. "Seat 2A, who's that?" The attendant hesitated. "Passenger name's Ava Morgan. Doesn't match our usual profile for first. Dressed casual, no business tags. Possibly a points upgrade." Bolton grunted. These upgrades are getting sloppy. Keep an eye on that." To him, first class was sacred ground in unspoken country where image equaled value. Jeans and hoodies were foreigners. He adjusted his tie in the cockpit mirror and muttered, "Can't have standards slipping on my watch." Ava felt the shift in temperature, not from the air system, but from attention. It always began the same way: subtle delay, measured politeness, a small distance growing between gestures. She'd seen it in boardrooms, in restaurants, in the faces of investors who mistook her assistant for the CEO. It's almost predictable, she thought. The moment people decide you don't belong, they start proving it to themselves. She tapped her pen lightly against her notebook. Her reflection in the window showed a calm face, eyes steady, mouth relaxed. "Don't react," she told herself. "Observe. I've learned," she once said to a friend, "that when they try to make you feel small, stay still. Let the echo of their words shrink instead." The boarding completed. Passengers settled. The cabin crew moved like choreography. Bolton stepped out briefly, greeting passengers, a gesture he believed made him the face of Aurora Air. He started with the front row firm handshake for Charles Whitmore, a financial advisor, polite nod to Eleanor Brooks, a regular traveler, laughter, a shared joke about flight routes. Then he moved down the aisle. When he reached 2A, his smile thinned. "Good afternoon," he said curtly, eyes flicking over Ava's hoodie, her tablet, her natural curls. "Flying for business or leisure observation?" she said simply. He blinked. "Observation." "Yes, just watching how things work." Bolton chuckled, thinking it a joke. "Well, hope we meet your expectations," he said, already turning to the next seat. He didn't offer his hand. Ava wrote one line Captain Bolton courteous to some, dismissive to others. Consistency check failed. The engines began to hum. As the cabin door closed, the world outside dimmed into distant city lights shrinking, sky swallowing the glass. Ava leaned back, her fingers resting on her tablet. The irony wasn't lost on her, the company she now owned. The culture she planned to reform was showing her exactly what needed to change in real time. No press release, no public statement could reveal truth as purely as this moment. A cabin full of civility, quietly divided by perception. A pilot proud of order, blind to the injustice stitched into its seams. She exhaled slowly. Sometimes silence is the loudest test, and the test had just begun. The engines were still idle. Boarding complete, the cabin lights softened to gold. From the cockpit, Captain Richard Bolton watched the reflection of his own uniform in the glass. Every line on that navy jacket had a purpose pressed, measured, and symmetrical. 3 decades of discipline had taught him that order was safety, and appearance was order. He ran a gloved hand down his sleeve, straightened the gold-trimmed epaulette, and looked to his co-pilot. Everything clean. "Yaki, sir," replied First Officer Dean Coulter. Younger, cautious. Bolton nodded, but didn't really listen. His mind had caught on something smaller, a note of irritation still humming from earlier. It had started 5 minutes ago, when Elliot Ward, the young flight attendant, tapped on the cockpit door. "Captain," Elliot had said quietly, "just a heads-up seat. Two-way looks. Unusual today." Bolton turned his head slightly. Unusual how Elliot hesitated. Passengers in a hoodie, jeans, sneakers. Doesn't match the first-class manifest profile. Thought you'd want to know. Bolton leaned back, expression unreadable. Name Ava Morgan. Doesn't ring a bell. She checked in as first class, but, doesn't seem like our regular clientele. Bolton sighed. Probably a standby upgrade, or someone using points. He hated points. They diluted the image of the cabin, the quiet exclusivity he had helped build over years. To him, first class wasn't just about a seat. It was a statement. We are the best. We look like it. That belief had never been written in Aurora Air's manuals, but he carried it like scripture. He checked his watch, 9:43 a.m. Departure in 12 minutes. The intercom crackled faintly. "Elliot again, Captain. She's asking for water." So Bolton frowned. She asked twice. "I'll get to it after the champagne service." But what? "Elliot?" "She's filming something on her tablet. Maybe notes. I just thought you should know." Bolton's jaw flexed. Passengers who look out of place often are. Keep it professional, but careful. I'll take a look before we push back." "Yes, sir." He flipped the switch to disable the cockpit camera feed. It wasn't policy, but he preferred to read the room himself. Too many people hiding behind screens these days. He thought, you can't sense trouble from a monitor. Outside the cockpit door, the world had already sorted itself into patterns he understood. Ava Morgan sat quietly, still waiting for a glass of water. Bolton didn't know her story, didn't care to. He saw only surfaces, clothes, posture, tone, and the surface told him everything he needed to believe. He adjusted his cap and stepped into the aisle. The first-class cabin fell into a kind of reverent silence, the kind reserved for senior authority. Bolton had that kind of presence, the kind that filled a room before he spoke. He smiled at Charles Whitmore, shook hands again with Eleanor Brooks. Small talk, familiar nods, little performances of civility. When his eyes landed on 2A, the smile changed fractionally tighter, shorter-lived. The passenger looked up, calm, direct gaze, hoodie zipped halfway. "Good morning," Bolton said, tone polite but clipped. "Everything all right here?" "Yes, Captain," she answered evenly. "Just waiting for some water." Bolton looked at the empty tray table, then at Elliot. "You'll see to that," he said, then turned back to her. "First time flying with us, no?" she said. "First time seeing it from this side." "This side." She nodded toward the aisle. "Observation, you might say?" There it was again, that word. Observation. It sounded strange coming from her, too deliberate. Bolton studied her face steady, unreadable. Something in him twitched a reflex of authority unacknowledged. He smiled, tight-lipped. "Well, enjoy the flight. Aurora Air takes pride in keeping our first-class experience consistent." "I can see that," she said. He moved on, but the exchange lingered. Not the words, the tone. She hadn't been impressed, intimidated, or eager to please. She had simply seen him, and that unsettled him more than any argument could have. Back in the cockpit, Bolton shut the door and sat heavily. Dean glanced at him. "All good," Bolton grunted. "Passenger in 2A. Doesn't fit the seat." Dean blinked. "Meaning?" Bolton waved a hand. "You can tell when someone belongs. This one doesn't." Dean said nothing. Bolton stared straight ahead. "I've been flying 30 years. I can spot entitlement, and I can spot impropriety. Sometimes they wear the same shoes." He said it like a fact, not an opinion, the kind of sentence that didn't invite response. But something about 2A gnawed at him like turbulence on a clear day. He told himself it wasn't prejudice. It was standard. He told himself that maintaining image kept passengers comfortable. That's what leadership was, knowing where people fit. Yet, as he stared at the pre-flight checklist, a sliver of discomfort worked its way in. Why did it bother me so much, he wondered. He shut that thought down before it finished forming. In the cabin, Ava sipped from a small paper cup that Elliot finally brought. She wrote quietly on her tablet. Captain's demeanor, polite, measured, dismissive tone, attendant deferential toward front-row passengers. System appears to reward appearance, not behavior. The hum of the aircraft softened into background music. The stage was set. Ava's face remained composed, but her thoughts moved with precision. This is what culture looks like, she thought. Not the slogans on the wall, but the silence between greetings. She leaned her head slightly against the window. Outside, the runway shimmered in morning light. "They see what they want to see," she murmured internally. "Let them. Truth reveals itself best when no one's defending it." Bolton's voice filled the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be departing shortly for Seattle Crown Airport. Flight time approximately 2 hours and 5 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight with Aurora Air. Polished, warm, perfect. The kind of voice that earned applause in training tapes, but underneath, there was an edge, the pride of a man who believed he was the brand. He muted the mic and muttered, "Let's keep this flight clean." Elliot, finishing his service round, paused near the cockpit door. "Captain." She settled now. "No issues." Bolton nodded. "Good. Still, keep your eye open. People like that can be unpredictable." "People like what?" Sir Bolton didn't answer right away. "Unstructured. he said finally. No sense of formality. That's how chaos starts small breaches of decorum. Elliot hesitated. She seemed polite. Bolton turned, his tone sharper than intended. I didn't say rude. I said out of place. There's a difference. The young attendant nodded, retreating toward the galley. Bolton adjusted his headset again, a little too firmly. Ava watched him from her seat when he passed by once more before takeoff. He didn't glance her way. That, too, said everything. In her notes, she typed only one line this time. Arrogance often mistakes itself for order. Then, in smaller letters below, almost like a whisper to herself, I won't need to speak. He'll reveal himself. The aircraft taxied toward the runway. Engines roared softly, then steadied into rhythm. From behind the locked door, Bolton prepared for takeoff. His hands moved with ritual precision throttle, flap, gear, every motion perfect. He was, by all visible measures, a model pilot. Yet outside that door, a mirror was waiting. A mirror in jeans, sneakers, and a navy hoodie quietly watching the man who thought he knew who belonged where. The story was already in motion. He just didn't know it yet. The seatbelt sign dimmed. A soft chime drifted through the first-class cabin, followed by the polite shuffle of attendants. Aurora Air Flight 481 rose through a layer of thin white cloud. The world below shrinking into quiet geometry rectangles of light. Silver rivers, the distant glint of harbor cranes. Inside, it was another kind of world, smaller, quieter, governed by invisible codes. Leather seats stretched wide like thrones. Each panel of wood veneer caught the light in perfect symmetry. The scent of champagne and citrus polish lingered in the air. Every sound, the click of glass, the hum of air vents, the polite laughter existed at half volume, as if even noise needed clearance here. Ava sat in 2A, silent. Her hands rested lightly on the tablet across her lap. From the corner of her eye, she could see the rhythm of the cabin who was served first, who was acknowledged with a name, who was not. The divide wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Prejudice has learned to whisper, she thought. It doesn't wear boots anymore. It wears manners. At the front, Charles Whitmore, seat 1C, leaned toward Eleanor Brooks in 1D, exchanging stories about some real estate investment in Palm Springs. Their laughter was comfortable, rehearsed. They were the kind of passengers Bolton called regulars, not because of loyalty points, but because of predictability. Elliot Ward, the attendant, poured their champagne with a familiarity that bordered on friendship. The usual for you, Mr. Whitmore. Of course, Charles replied, voice warm with the confidence of someone who expected to be remembered. Elliot smiled. And for you, Ms. Brooks, I'll take the brute today. Thank you, dear. He nodded, placing the glasses gently on white napkins, bowing slightly as he stepped away. When he reached Ava's row, his tone softened, polite but distant, that carefully neutral timbre used for strangers of uncertain standing. Would you like something to drink, ma'am? Just water, Ava said. Still, he nodded. I'll bring it shortly, but shortly stretched into 10 minutes, then 15. Ava didn't frown. She simply opened her notes. She typed response time variable, tone changes with perceived status, nonverbal cues distance, or judgment. From the cockpit, Captain Bolton made his rounds. He liked to stretch his legs early in the flight, under the guise of checking passenger comfort. In truth, it was inspection, a ritual he believed kept order visible. He emerged from the cockpit with that same posture back straight, chin slightly lifted. His uniform caught the light, badges gleaming like medals from an invisible war. He started at the front. "Mr. Whitmore," Bolton said, his handshake firm, his smile rehearsed. "Good to see you again. Seattle again. Board meeting. Captain. Same old chaos." Bolton chuckled. "Well, we'll keep the skies smooth for you." Then, turning slightly, "Ms. Brooks, always a pleasure." Eleanor smiled, adjusting her silk scarf. "Still flying with the best? Captain, wouldn't have it any other way." The laughter that followed was soft, exclusive, the laughter of those who share the same tier of air. Then Bolton moved down the aisle. His gaze passed over 2A, a blink of recognition, then avoidance. He didn't stop, didn't greet. To the untrained eye, it looked accidental. To Ava, it was textbook. He paused briefly at 2B, an empty seat, then continued toward the galley. Ava's reflection in the window didn't move. She simply tapped her screen. "Captain greets all passengers except me. Behavior consistent with unconscious bias. Pattern 3, omission." Elliot finally brought the water. "Apologies for the wait," he said quickly, setting it down. Ava looked up, voice calm. "You've been busy?" "Yes, ma'am. Full service today." He smiled, thin and professional. Then he left. She watched the condensation trail down the glass of the cup, one slow line, cutting through its own reflection. In a different life, maybe this would have stung. But Ava had seen enough boardrooms to know that silence can bruise deeper than insult. The difference now was purpose. Every slight was a data point. Every pause, a mirror. If you measure it, you can change it, she thought. A few rows ahead, Bolton leaned toward Elliot near the galley. "She's not talking much." "Huh?" Elliot hesitated. "No, sir. Quiet type." Bolton smirked. "Quiet can mean a lot of things. Keep it orderly. That's all." "Yeah, sir." Bolton glanced down the aisle once more. Ava was looking out the window, fingers moving across her tablet. "Looks like she's writing a novel," he muttered. Elliot chuckled nervously. "Or reviewing us." Bolton raised a brow. "Let's hope she's generous." He didn't mean it. He was already convinced she wasn't supposed to be there. Ava shifted slightly, stretching her legs. Her eyes scanned the cabin, 12 seats, 12 stories of comfort calibrated to familiarity. She could tell how many of these people flew often, not by their suits, but by their ease, the way they pressed the call button without guilt, the way their laughter didn't lower when staff passed. They've learned the rhythm of privilege, she thought. And privilege, like any language, sounds fluent when you've never been corrected. A faint turbulence rippled through the air. The captain's voice came on, "Ladies and gentlemen." Just a brief patch of light turbulence. Nothing to worry about. His tone was fatherly, reassuring, the voice of someone accustomed to being trusted. Ava smiled faintly. Reassurance works best when you already believe the voice that offers it. Time stretched quietly. Meals were served: warm bread, steak medallions, delicate trays. Elliot knelt slightly as he placed each plate on the tables in row 1, speaking softly, checking twice on seasoning and preference. When he reached Ava, his tone returned to neutral. "Chicken or beef?" "Ma'am, chicken's fine." He nodded, placed the tray, and vanished again. She noticed the small difference. Her plate lacked the extra garnish. It wasn't negligence. It was hierarchy. Small things. Always small things. She took a slow bite. The flavor was fine. The meaning was familiar. Sometimes, she thought, disrespect doesn't shout across the room. It folds your napkin just a little less carefully. Through the window, clouds spread out like fields of white marble. Somewhere above them, the sunlight broke through, slicing the cabin in half-light on the front row. Shadow, where Ava sat. She noticed it, smiled slightly. Fitting, she thought. She looked around once more. Elliot was laughing quietly with Whitmore. Bolton had returned to the cockpit. The rest of the cabin had sunk into that soft silence of satiation, the quiet of people who believe comfort is earned. Ava's tablet screen reflected her face calm, analytical, composed. She added one last line to her notes before closing it. Discrimination doesn't always come dressed as hatred. Sometimes it wears hospitality. Then she leaned back, eyes half closed, listening to the steady rhythm of the engines. Somewhere up front, Bolton's voice returned, light over the intercom. Smooth skies ahead. Folks. She almost laughed. Not for long, she thought, though the thought had no bitterness, only clarity. Because truth, like altitude, reveals itself only when you rise above the fog. The cabin had settled into that mid-flight rhythm where everything looked calm, but nothing truly rested. Forks touched porcelain. Laptops glowed faintly in the dimmed light. The engines hummed a low, even song beneath the surface conversation. Ava had been quiet for most of it, watching the details that others ignored, the small delays, the looks exchanged between passengers, the smiles that seemed to shrink the further they traveled down the aisle. Her tablet rested on the tray, its black screen reflecting the faint light from above. She pressed the button for service. Elliot appeared moments later, his hands full of empty glasses. "Yes, ma'am. Could I have a glass of water, please?" Ava asked, voice calm, unassuming. "Of course," he said quickly. "Just a moment." He disappeared toward the galley. She watched him stop at the front row, refilling champagne, chatting softly with Charles Whitmore and Eleanor Brooks. He laughed at something they said, nodded, then moved to another seat. Her cup of water never came. 5 minutes passed, then 10. She pressed the button again. This time Elliot didn't come immediately. He was serving dessert to the businessman across the aisle, Preston Gale, whose suit probably cost more than most people's yearly rent. Preston was tall, pale, and had the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime of being listened to. His watch caught the light every time he gestured, as if it needed to remind people who it belonged to. When Elliot finally approached, he leaned slightly toward Ava, voice polite but thin. "Still water. Right. Yes," she said. "Thank you." He nodded, but didn't move. The galley door opened again and another passenger called for more wine. Elliot turned, smiled at the other man, and walked away. Ava sat back, the seat creaking softly. Her hand hovered over the tablet, but she didn't type. Instead, she watched the slow rhythm of neglect unfold like a rehearsed play. This isn't anger, she thought. It's study. And every second they delay, they write their own report for me. Across the aisle. Preston Gale looked over. His eyes swept over her sneakers, the hoodie, the tablet. He smirked slightly. "Guess they'll let anyone up here these days," he said, his tone carrying the easy arrogance of someone testing a boundary. Ava turned her head slowly, not startled. "Excuse me." Preston smiled wider, the kind of smile meant to look harmless. "No offense," he added, which of course meant full offense. "It's just this used to be the section for regular flyers. You know. Now they're probably selling upgrades to anyone with enough points or whatever program they run for. Assistants." His voice lingered on the last word like it was dirty. For a second, no one spoke. Charles Whitmore chuckled under his breath. Eleanor Brooks looked down at her tablet, pretending not to hear. Elliot froze mid-step, torn between professionalism and discomfort. Then from the cockpit door, Captain Richard Bolton appeared. He'd stepped out for his usual mid-flight check, another chance to be seen, to remind everyone who commanded the air they were breathing. He caught the tail end of Preston's remark, didn't ask for context, and let out a low, approving laugh. Now, Preston, don't start a riot in my cabin, he said, still smiling. We'll have the FAA on us. Laughter followed nervous, shallow, complicit. Bolton clapped Preston on the shoulder, the gesture of equals. Then his gaze passed over Ava, just long enough to make it clear that whatever had been said was already forgiven. Ava didn't respond. Her posture didn't shift. Her expression didn't harden. She reached for the small paper napkin on her tray and dabbed the edge of her mouth as if removing an invisible stain. I suppose, she said softly, some riots start quietly. No one replied. The air inside the cabin seemed to hold its breath. Bolton's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, just long enough for her to see the discomfort beneath his authority. He recovered quickly, clearing his throat. Let's keep things civilized, he said, as if the uncivil had come from her. Then he turned back toward the galley. Elliot reappeared, holding a bottle of still water. His hand shook slightly as he poured. Here you go, ma'am. Thank you, Ava said. She lifted the glass. Her reflection caught in the ripple of water. For a moment, the cabin noise faded, the clinking glasses, the low laughter, the hum of the engines. It all became distant, hollow. They think silence is surrender, she thought, but silence has a longer memory than outrage. She took a slow sip. Bolton lingered near the curtain to the galley, pretending to check the service list. He kept glancing at her seat, at the way she sat upright, unbothered, hands folded loosely in her lap. Something about her calm unsettled him. Preston, emboldened by the captain's earlier laugh, muttered again, loud enough for the nearby seats to hear. Bet she's reviewing us for her vlog. Probably tell everyone she was oppressed because she didn't get her drink fast enough. Eleanor gave a polite laugh. It was the kind of laugh that said, I know it's wrong, but I'm not brave enough to say so. Ava looked straight ahead. In her mind, there was only stillness, the kind she'd learned from years of watching men lose their temper first, and their power right after. When you stay calm, they show you who they are, she reminded herself. She placed the half-finished glass on the tray and pressed the service button once more. Elliot appeared instantly this time, voice nervous. Everything all right, ma'am, yes, Ava said evenly. I was wondering if there's a place I could stretch my legs for a moment. He hesitated. The seatbelt sign's on, but you can move near the galley if it's brief. Thank you. She stood, adjusting her hoodie, and stepped carefully into the aisle. The heads that had turned away from her earlier now followed her quietly, curious but unwilling to meet her eyes when she looked back. The galley lights spilled onto the carpet like a stage. Elliot moved aside as she entered. Bolton turned just as she stepped closer. Can I help you, ma'am? He asked, the formality sharp as glass. I just came to ask for that water again, she said. Bolton frowned, confused. Didn't he already? Yes, she interrupted gently. But sometimes repetition helps people notice when something's wrong. For a heartbeat, he didn't know what to say. Then he forced a laugh, the kind used to end conversations rather than begin them. Well, no harm done now. You've got what you asked for. Ava looked at him calmly. Yes, I did, She didn't move for several seconds. The hum of the engines filled the silence between them. Then she nodded once, turned, and walked back to her seat. Bolton watched her go, irritation flickering behind his eyes. There was something in her composure that felt dangerous, not loud, not rebellious, but certain. He muttered to Elliot as she passed, "Keep her comfortable. No more requests." Elliot nodded, unsure whether it was an order or a warning. Ava sat down, crossed her legs, and reopened her tablet. The reflection of the cabin shimmered faintly across the screen. She began to type. Observation Log 4. The silence of witnesses is what gives prejudice its wings. Then she set the tablet aside and looked out the window again. The clouds below looked soft enough to walk on, endless and pale. She breathed slowly, eyes steady. They don't know yet, she thought. But every flight has a landing, and some landings change the map. The turbulence light blinked on with a soft chime. Outside, clouds gathered in long, thin ribbons, streaking past the window like smoke. The cabin was still. Conversation quieted, and for a few seconds, there was peace, the fragile kind that lives right before something breaks. Ava had been seated, tablet on her lap, when she noticed the subtle shift in energy. Elliot had disappeared again, and Captain Bolton's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. Light turbulence ahead." His tone was composed, professional, but underneath it ran a faint undercurrent of irritation. She fastened her belt loosely, eyes still on the darkened screen of her tablet. The reflection that looked back at her was calm, unbothered. But calmness has a weight, and sometimes the people who need control the most can't stand to see it in others. The curtain to the galley moved. Bolton stepped out again. He had no real reason to be there. The flight was steady, his first officer fully capable, but something had been gnawing at him since earlier. That woman in 2A, the one who didn't smile enough, who didn't seem impressed, who looked, to him, like a question he couldn't answer. He walked slowly down the aisle, hands clasped behind his back. "Seatbelts, please," he reminded, his eyes flicking between passengers. Every buckle clicked obediently, until he reached her row. Ava's belt was on, her posture straight, her eyes turned toward the window. But he stopped anyway. "Ma'am," he said, "seatbelt sign's on. I'll need you to stay seated." She turned her head slightly. "I am seated, Captain." Bolton looked at the screen above her seat, then back at her. "I'll also need to verify your boarding pass." Ava blinked. "My boarding pass?" "Yes," he said, voice even but firm. "We've had a few system errors lately. Just want to make sure you're in the correct seat." Across the aisle, Preston Gale looked up from his tablet, already grinning. Eleanor Brooks shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to listen. The air tightened, invisible but heavy. Ava's tone remained soft. "You haven't asked anyone else to show theirs." Bolton straightened, the uniform pulling tighter across his shoulders. "I ask when something doesn't add up. Ma'am, just a standard check." Her gaze stayed on him, steady but polite. "Of course." She reached into her small tote bag, retrieved her phone, and opened the Aurora Air app. Within seconds, her digital ticket appeared on the screen: Flight 481 First Class, Seat 2A. She held it out for him to see. Bolton didn't lean forward. He looked down at it from a distance, as if the screen itself was unclean. He murmured. "Well, it says first class, but that might be the glitch I mentioned. This seat is typically reserved for our frequent flyers. You understand?" Ava's eyes didn't move. "I understand that the system seems to be working fine for everyone else. There was a pause long enough for the hum of the engines to fill it. Bolton's jaw shifted slightly. "Look," he said, his tone cooling. "It's not personal. We just have to maintain certain standards. Sometimes people buy basic tickets and well end up here by accident." The word accident hung in the air like a drop of oil on water. Ava studied his face. Every detail was composed, the clipped tone, the tight smile, the authority that expected agreement. She'd met this kind of man before in boardrooms, in banks, in places where arrogance was called expertise. "He doesn't see me," she thought. "He sees a disruption to the picture he's curated for himself." "I'd like to document this," she said quietly, lifting her phone slightly, "for Aurora's passenger relations department, just so everything is accurate." Bolton's expression hardened. "There's no need to record, ma'am." "I prefer to have a record," she replied. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Put that down." Her tone didn't change. "This is within my rights. I'm not disturbing anyone." Something cracked so small you couldn't see it, only feel it. Years of control, of believing his image untouchable, now strained by a woman sitting too calmly in a place he thought she shouldn't be. "Ma'am," he said again, sharper now, "I'm giving you a direct instruction." Ava didn't move. "I'm giving you the truth." For a heartbeat. They stood in silence, the world between them narrowing to a single pulse of tension. Then Bolton's hand moved, fast, careless, not thought reaction. He reached to swat the phone from her hand. His palm caught the device, but his motion was too hard, too wide. The back of his hand brushed her wrist, then struck the edge of her cheek as the phone fell. The crack of plastic on carpet was soft, but the sound of impact wasn't. Ava froze. Her cheek stung. The entire cabin went silent. For the first time, Bolton seemed to realize what had happened. His hand hovered midair, fingers trembling with the weight of what they'd just done. Elliot Ward, halfway down the aisle, stopped cold. Charles Whitmore stood, then hesitated, unsure whether to intervene or not. Eleanor Brooks gasped quietly into her hand. Preston Gale muttered something that sounded like she had it coming, but no one responded. Bolton straightened, his face flushing red. "That was an accident," he said quickly, voice low but audible. "You reach forward." Ava didn't answer. She bent slowly, picked up her phone. The screen was cracked. A small line of blood had appeared just below her ear, faint but visible. She looked up at him, her voice steady. "You just hit me." Bolton's eyes darted to the watching passengers. "No, don't twist this." She held the phone in her hand, screen facing her. For a second, she almost spoke, but then she didn't. Let silence do it, she thought. Let them hear what they've been pretending not to see. Elliot rushed forward, his voice breaking the air. "Captain, maybe we should." Bolton cut him off. "Return to your station. Mr. Ward." The cabin remained frozen. Nobody breathed loud enough to be heard. Ava leaned back slowly into her seat. Her pulse was calm, even. She opened her cracked phone again, pressed record, and set it quietly on the tray table. Her tone was almost clinical when she spoke, addressing no one and everyone at once. "This is Aurora Air Flight 481, she said. "I requested assistance, was asked for identification. No one else was asked to show, and then struck when I tried to document the exchange." Her voice was steady, almost emotionless, the kind of tone that made everyone else's sound like noise. Bolton stepped back, realizing now that every move, every breath, was being watched. He turned to Elliot. "Call ground control when we land. We'll sort this out." But the words rang hollow. The balance of the room had changed. No one laughed. No one looked away. Ava reached for a napkin and dabbed the faint smear of blood at the corner of her face. The white fabric turned pink, then red. She placed it on the tray beside her broken phone. Her hand trembled once, then stopped. "He wanted to remind me of my place," she thought. "Instead, he reminded himself of mine." Outside the window, the sunlight cut through the clouds again, spilling across her seat and no one else's. It wasn't mercy. It was truth. The cabin was no longer quiet. It was the silence of people who didn't know what to do, the kind that tastes metallic in the air. A few whispered. Others stared at their screens, pretending to read. The hum of the engines continued, indifferent, steady as a heartbeat. Captain Richard Bolton stood rigid, still near seat 2A. His jaw was set, his authority wounded but alive. He had made a mistake, he knew it, but his instincts didn't know how to yield. For men like him, control wasn't a choice, it was oxygen. Without it, they gasped. He reached for his radio. His hand trembled only slightly as he pressed the button. "This is Flight 481, Captain Bolton. We've got a passenger disturbance on board. Requesting immediate ground support upon landing. Possible non-compliance." His tone was measured, professional, stripped of everything that had just happened. To anyone listening, it would sound routine. Ava watched him from her seat, eyes calm, face still bearing a faint mark along her cheek. She said nothing. There was power in letting the story tell itself. Around her, the cabin felt like a stage where everyone already knew their lines. Preston Gale leaned toward Charles Whitmore, muttering, "They always play the victim card. Just wait. She'll sue for emotional distress." Charles didn't answer. His face had turned pale. He'd seen Bolton's hand connect, clear as day. But silence, once chosen, is hard to undo. So he looked down at his watch instead, checking a time that suddenly meant nothing. 15 minutes later, the intercom clicked again. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bolton said, his voice firm, "due to a passenger issue. We'll be met by security upon arrival. Please remain seated when we land." There was no trace of doubt in his tone. He had rewritten the story before it had even ended. When the plane touched down, the brakes hissed softly. The engines exhaled. From the window, Ava could see the flashing lights of an airport vehicle waiting on the tarmac. Two figures in dark uniforms stood beside it, their posture already telling her everything she needed to know. Authority doesn't rush when it believes itself righteous. The door opened. The first to step in were Officer Grant and Officer Miller, both white, both older, both carrying the weight of years spent believing the person in the captain's uniform first. Their badges caught the overhead light. Bolton greeted them with the relief of someone returning to familiar ground. "Officers," he said, his voice steady now. "Thank you for coming. We had a passenger refuse to comply with safety instructions, became aggressive when asked to show her ticket, and attempted to film the crew in violation of policy." Grant nodded once, already convinced. "Where is the passenger?" Sir Bolton tilted his head toward Ava's seat. "2A. She's been uncooperative the entire flight." The two men turned toward her. No questions, no hesitation. The story had already been told, and she wasn't the author they recognized. "Ma'am," Officer Grant began, his voice polite in that distant official way, "we're going to need you to step off the aircraft with us. Please." Ava looked up slowly. Her voice was soft but unwavering. Did you speak to anyone else on this flight before deciding that Grant hesitated for half a breath? Captain Bolton is responsible for the aircraft. His word is enough, she finished for him. He blinked, thrown by the calm in her tone. Bolton crossed his arms, watching, ready to regain the narrative. Let's not make this harder than it already is. Ma'am, around them, the passengers watched without watching. Eyes flickered between curiosity and cowardice. Preston looked satisfied. Eleanor stared at her lap. But 2 rows back, a man young, black, traveling alone, spoke up. "Excuse me," he said quietly, but his voice carried, "I saw what happened. She didn't do anything wrong." Bolton turned, his expression sharp. "Sir, please remain seated. We're handling it." The young man didn't lower his gaze. "You hit her." The words fell into the air like a dropped stone. Grant glanced between them, unease flickering across his face. "Captain, is that true?" Bolton exhaled sharply. "I was defending myself." She raised her phone toward my face. I moved her hand away. "It was an accident." Another passenger, an older black woman near the back, spoke now. "That's not what I saw." Bolton's voice tightened. "Ma'am, you weren't close enough to understand the situation." Her reply came fast. "Close enough to see a man strike a woman and then call her the problem." The tension thickened. Officer Miller shifted, uncomfortable. But Grant stayed focused on Bolton. "Captain, let's step outside for a second." Bolton didn't move. "You'll remove the passenger first. I won't have this flight turn into a spectacle." Ava finally stood. Her movement was slow, deliberate. She picked up her cracked phone and the folded napkin, still marked faintly with blood. When she spoke, her tone carried no heat, only precision. "I'll go," she said. "But before I do, I'd like to state, for the record, that I never refused an instruction. I never raised my voice, and I have video evidence of what just happened." Bolton stiffened. "You're not authorized to record crew members." She looked at him. "Neither are you authorized to hit them." The words landed like truth often does quietly, but with no place to hide. Grant cleared his throat. "Ma'am, let's just step off and sort this out." She nodded once, collected her things, and walked down the aisle. As she passed, the passengers' eyes followed her, not all with sympathy, but all with awareness. She could feel it, the shift, the subtle breaking of a wall people had long mistaken for order. At the cabin door, she paused. "Captain," she said, turning just slightly toward Bolton, "thank you for showing me how your system works." Then she stepped out. The officers followed, one on each side. Outside. The cool air hit her skin like relief. The flashing lights painted the tarmac in slow, rhythmic pulses of blue and white. Somewhere behind her, the captain was already talking again, loud enough for the first-class passengers to hear unfortunate situation. "Folks, safety comes first." She smiled faintly. Safety for whom she thought. Grant led her toward the waiting vehicle. "We'll get this sorted out," he said, trying to sound reassuring. "I'm sure you will," she replied. "Eventually." He didn't catch the tone. Most people like him never did. From the window of the plane, the young black passenger watched as she walked away, flanked by the officers. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But something in her calm felt larger than the moment. Inside the cockpit, Bolton sank into his seat, wiping his forehead. The co-pilot looked at him carefully. "You okay?" Captain Bolton didn't answer. He was already drafting his report in his head, the one where authority remained intact and truth stayed politely out of view. Back on the tarmac, Ava turned once more toward the aircraft. Its lights glowed in the fog, clean and sterile, like an image trying to stay pure. This is what a system looks like when it protects itself, she thought. It doesn't need villains. It just needs habit. And habit, she knew, could be broken, not with anger, not with shouting, but with precision and patience. Because power that hides behind procedure never expects to be studied by the person it tried to silence. And that, she thought, was its first mistake. The tarmac lights flickered softly in the morning haze. The air outside smelled faintly of jet fuel and salt, carried from the bay beyond the runway. Ava stood between the two officers, her hoodie brushing against the breeze. The ground crew watched from a distance, whispering. They'd seen passengers escorted off planes before, angry, drunk, shouting, but never like this. Never someone so still. Officer Grant cleared his throat. "We can do this in the terminal." "Ma'am," he said, "there's a holding area we can use until the airline decides what happens next." Ava's gaze drifted toward the plane. Through the window, she could see Captain Bolton in the cockpit, moving his hands, gesturing as he spoke to someone on his radio. He looked smaller now. That was the thing about distance. It resized people. She turned back to the officers. "Before we go any further," she said, "I need to remind you of something." Grant frowned slightly. "What's that?" "According to the Aurora Air Passenger Equity Charter," she said evenly. Section 4.3. Any dispute involving claims of discrimination or mistreatment must be reviewed by a customer advocacy representative before a passenger can be removed or detained. The words hung in the air. The two men looked at each other, unsure. Miller spoke first. "Ma'am, I'm not familiar with that policy. Our instructions came directly from the captain." Ava's tone didn't change. "That's understandable. Most people aren't familiar. But the charter is part of your airline's own legal framework. You'll find it under Aurora's public passenger rights documentation. It was implemented after a settlement case in 2018. Grant blinked. He wasn't used to passengers quoting policy numbers. His hand went instinctively to the radio on his shoulder. "Hold on," he muttered, stepping a few feet away to call the terminal. "Control. This is Grant. Do we have any reference to Passenger Equity Charter Section 4.3? "Yeah, 4.3. Says something about an advocacy review." Miller stayed with Ava, studying her. "You seem to know a lot about their policy," he said. Ava met his gaze. "I read what applies to me. Most people don't, until it's too late." Grant returned, his voice quieter now. "They want us to hold. They're sending someone from the airline down to verify." He paused, his tone shifting slightly. "Uncertain?" "Apparently." "She's right." Ava didn't smile. "I usually am." They stood in silence for a moment. The airport hum continued around them, distant announcements. A rolling cart. The slow whine of engines powering down. The world was moving as if nothing had happened. But inside that small pocket of stillness near Gate 12, everything had changed. Officer Miller adjusted his stance, uneasy. "So we wait." "Yes," Ava said. "That's what the rules say." From the plane, passengers began to disembark. Their eyes flicked toward her as they passed, some pretending not to notice, others offering small, guilty glances. Preston Gale walked by first, shoulders high, voice low to his phone. "Yeah, they took her off. Delayed us 15 minutes. People like that." He didn't finish the sentence when he caught Ava's eyes. He looked away quickly. Eleanor Brooks followed, clutching her handbag. She paused halfway, as if she wanted to say something, then didn't. Her silence felt heavy with realization. like someone who had seen the mirror and couldn't yet face what it showed. Finally, Elliot Ward came down the stairs, his steps slower than the rest. He stopped a few feet away. His voice was soft. "Ma'am, are you all right?" "I'm fine," Ava said. "How about you?" He hesitated. "I should have said something." "Yes," she replied. "You should have." He nodded, shame crossing his face like a shadow. "They're sending a manager," he said. "Victoria Hale. She's the COO. Ava tilted her head slightly. "That's good. We can start the review properly." Grant looked between them. "Ma'am, you don't have to sound like a lawyer. This'll get sorted." Ava turned to him. "If I sounded like a lawyer, you wouldn't be standing here wondering what to do next." He didn't answer. He couldn't. 10 minutes later, a woman in a tailored navy suit appeared at the gate. Her badge read, Victoria Hale, Chief Operating Officer. She was mid-40s, blonde hair tied back, walking fast but not rushed. She carried the air of someone who'd cleaned up other people's messes before. "Officers," she said briskly. "Thank you. I'll take it from here." Grant and Miller stepped aside, relieved. Victoria turned to Ava. "I'm told you're claiming discrimination. I'd like to hear directly from you what happened." Ava looked at her carefully. There was no arrogance in Victoria's tone, just exhaustion, an executive who'd been summoned to put out another fire. "You can call it whatever you want," Ava said. "All I did was ask for water and then ask why I was being treated differently. Then your captain hit me. And now, here we are." Victoria blinked. "He struck you." Ava handed her the cracked phone. "You can see for yourself. Video starts 20 seconds before it happened." Victoria took the phone, tapped the screen, and watched. Her eyes hardened as she listened to the captain's voice echo from the recording calm at first, then sharp, then the faint sound of contact. She exhaled slowly, pressing stop. "I'll need to bring you inside," she said. "There's a quiet office in the lounge where we can review this further." "I prefer to stay right here," Ava replied. "This conversation started in public. It can stay in public." For a moment, Victoria said nothing. Then she nodded. "As you wish." She turned toward the officers. "You're dismissed. She's within policy. I'll handle the review." The officers exchanged glances, part surprise, part relief, and walked away. Bolton appeared at the top of the jet bridge then, descending slowly. His cap was gone, his face still flushed. "Victoria," he said tightly, "this is unnecessary. She's twisting Richard." She interrupted, her voice low but edged with steel. "Go back to the flight deck. Now." He hesitated, caught between indignation and fear, then turned back without another word. Victoria turned again to Ava. "I'll make sure this is documented properly." She said, "No one should be removed without due process." Ava studied her face, as if weighing her sincerity. Then she said quietly, "That's what your own charter promises. I'm glad someone here still believes in it." Victoria nodded once, her composure softening. "I'll personally handle your case." "Good," Ava said, "because I'd like to see how your system performs when it thinks I'm just a passenger." Her words landed gently, but they stayed. Victoria didn't yet understand what she meant, but she would. As the two women stood there, the plane emptied behind them. The day brightened. The sound of a new boarding announcement filled the terminal, indifferent and routine. But inside that silence between them, something far less routine was beginning. Ava adjusted her hoodie, her voice lowered, almost to herself. "They think power lives in volume," she thought, "but it actually lives in rules and who remembers them when others forget." She followed Victoria toward the terminal lounge, the faint reflection of her cracked phone still glinting in her hand. The small screen held more than evidence. It held the shape of the shift that was coming. And for the first time that morning, the system blinked. The lounge was nearly empty, save for the steady hum of the air conditioner and the faint aroma of stale coffee. Outside its glass walls, travelers hurried past with rolling bags and nervous glances at departure screens, unaware that inside this small room, an airline's culture was about to be dissected in real time. Victoria Hale closed the door behind her, clipboard in hand. Her face bore the calm of a professional who'd spent 2 decades solving other people's mistakes, but this was different. The report had said pilot struck passenger. Even written words carried a shock. Now, standing across from the passenger in question, she could feel that the situation was heavier than paperwork. Ava sat at the small table, hoodie sleeves rolled up, hands folded neatly. Her cracked phone lay beside her, the damage catching the overhead light like a scar. The mark on her cheek had faded to a faint blush, but it was still visible. Victoria cleared her throat. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. Ms. Morgan." Ava's tone was quiet. "I didn't have much of a choice." "I understand," Victoria said, sitting across from her. "I just want to make sure I have every detail correct." "You mentioned earlier that Captain Bolton struck me," Ava said, finishing it for her. "Yes." Victoria nodded, writing quickly. "Could you start from the beginning?" "From the moment you boarded," Ava took a breath. Her voice didn't waver, but her delivery was precise, factual, like a surgeon narrating an operation. She described the small moments that most people wouldn't have noticed: the first-class passengers who were greeted by name, the champagne offered to everyone but her, the delay in service, the laugh from the cockpit when the businessman mocked her. Then she told of the confrontation, how she'd been asked for her ticket when no one else had been, how the captain's hand had struck her face. Victoria's pen slowed. She had read hundreds of incident reports, but rarely had she heard one told with such calm. There was no embellishment, no raised tone, just truth, laid out so neatly it was impossible to ignore. When Ava finished, she looked at the woman across from her and said simply, "That's what happened." Victoria closed her notebook. "I believe you." Ava didn't smile. "Then you're ahead of most people today." Victoria hesitated, studying her. "You seem familiar with how this process works." Ava shrugged lightly. "I read your company's charter." That answer surprised her. Most passengers didn't even know such a charter existed, let alone quote it. "You know," Victoria said slowly, "I've had complaints about Captain Bolton before. Nothing proven. Always the same pattern tone issues. Selective treatment. But no one ever wanted to challenge him formally. Seniority protects him." "Seniority," Ava repeated softly. "That word has covered a lot of wrongs in this country." Before Victoria could respond, the door burst open. Captain Richard Bolton entered without knocking, uniform still pressed, face red with indignation. "Victoria, I need a word." She stood immediately. "Richard, you're out of line. This is an internal review, not your debrief." He ignored her, pointing toward Ava. "This woman disrupted my flight. I've got witnesses. I want her off company property before I file my own report for endangerment." Victoria's voice was sharp now. "Richard, stop talking." Bolton stepped closer, lowering his tone, but not his arrogance. "You don't understand the kind of passengers we deal with. Victoria, she was combative, filming crew members, ignoring safety signs. You can't let people like that dictate how we run our cabins." Ava watched him quietly. Every word he said was a mirror he held up to himself, and he didn't even see it. He's so used to command the truth sounds like mutiny to him, she thought. Victoria crossed her arms. You struck a passenger. Richard. I deflected her phone. He corrected. It was reflex. She bled. That's her claim. No, Ava said softly. That's your camera's claim. Bolton froze. Victoria turned sharply. What camera? The cabin surveillance feed, Ava said. Every Aurora Air first-class cabin has a two-angle security recording one front, one aisle. Section 2.7 of your passenger protection policy. Victoria's eyebrows lifted. You're right, she said. Surprised. I'd forgotten the clause was active on domestic routes. Bolton's color drained slightly. You can't just go pulling that footage. It's privileged. It's company property. Victoria cut in. And I'm company management. If there's footage, we'll review it. Bolton's jaw tightened. Victoria, you're going to let one passenger question a 30-year record of service. I'm going to let the truth decide that. She replied. The silence that followed felt heavy, the kind that wraps around a person when their certainty starts to crumble. Ava sat still, her eyes never leaving Bolton's. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. His authority was unraveling in real time. Thread by thread, Victoria stepped toward the door. I'll request the footage immediately. Until then, Captain, you're relieved from flight duty pending review. Go home. Bolton blinked. Excuse me. You heard me, she said. You're done for today. His mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, he seemed aware of how small the room was and how many eyes were finally watching. He turned to Ava, his tone half warning, half plea. You don't know who you're dealing with. Ava's reply came so softly it almost didn't exist. Neither do you. Victoria returned her focus to Ava. I'll need to take a statement for the record, and I'll be reviewing the footage myself. Take your time, Ava said. I'm not in a hurry. Victoria looked at her then, really looked beyond the hoodie, beyond the simplicity. There was a poise there, an authority that didn't need titles. Something about her calm made sense now, though Victoria couldn't yet place why. She gathered her papers, then paused. Ms. Morgan, if you don't mind me asking, what do you do for a living? Ava smiled faintly, almost kindly. I try to fix broken systems. Victoria nodded, not realizing the depth of the answer. Then you'll understand what I'm about to do. Ava stood, ready to leave. I already do. As Victoria walked toward the operations office to request the footage, Bolton lingered by the door. His pride was splintering, but his habit of dominance hadn't yet caught up. He looked at Ava once more, his voice low. You've made a powerful mistake. She met his gaze with calm precision. So have you. When he left, the room seemed to exhale. The air felt lighter, cleaner, as if the truth had just opened a window. Ava picked up her phone and tucked it into her bag. Outside the glass wall, the terminal buzzed on, ordinary as ever. A family laughed near a coffee cart. An announcement echoed about a gate change. And somewhere a janitor pushed a broom across spotless tile. The world, as always, pretended nothing had happened. But Ava knew better. Systems don't fall apart with noise. They collapse quietly, one small rule at a time. One lie undone by a fact no one expected her to know. Justice doesn't need volume, she thought. It only needs memory. And Aurora Air was about to remember everything. The operations lounge had turned quiet again. The hum of the airport outside faded into background noise, like the memory of something already irrelevant. Victoria Hale sat at the small table, her laptop open. the glow from its screen reflecting against the brushed metal of her badge. The recording from the aircraft camera was uploading to headquarters. Every few seconds, the progress bar ticked forward, and with each tick, the air in the room grew heavier. Ava watched from across the table, still and patient. She seemed entirely detached from the rush of corporate urgency around her. Her hands were folded, her gaze steady on the window, where the blurred silhouettes of passing travelers moved like distant ghosts. To anyone else, she might have looked like a tired passenger waiting for justice. But there was something in her stillness, an awareness that didn't need to demand attention. It already had it. Victoria's phone buzzed once, sharp and urgent. She checked the screen. Incoming call. Daniel Prescott, CEO. Aurora Air. She hesitated. Then she answered. Daniel. His voice came through, clipped and low. Victoria, where are you right now? I'm at the Orion Terminal Lounge, she replied. Handling the passenger incident? Captain Bolton struck a woman during boarding. I have her here. There was silence on the other end. Then Prescott's tone changed measured, uneasy. The passenger's name, Ava Morgan, Victoria said, glancing across the table. Seat 2A. Why, the pause that followed was longer this time. It wasn't confusion. It was realization settling in. When Prescott spoke again, his voice carried a weight that turned the room cold. Victoria, do you know who she is? I know she's articulate, knows our policies better than half the staff, and she was just assaulted by our captain. That's what I know, Victoria said, irritation flickering beneath her professionalism. She's not just a passenger, Prescott said quietly. She's the principal investor behind Novacor Holdings, the same Novacor that finalized the acquisition of 70% of Aurora Air yesterday. The pen in Victoria's hand stopped moving. You're telling me she owns us, Prescott said. As of 9 Mem, yesterday. She's the controlling shareholder of this airline. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was hollow. Victoria's breath caught halfway. Across the table, Ava remained unreadable, but something in her eyes suggested she'd known this moment would come. I'm initiating a secure call, Prescott said quickly. Don't move. And for God's sake, don't let Bolton leave the building. Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. Understood? The screen of her laptop flickered, shifting from the upload window to a live video feed. A man in his 60s appeared, sharp suit, silver hair, calm authority. Daniel Prescott. His office background glowed faintly with city lights. His expression was composed, but beneath it there was the unmistakable strain of a man realizing how fragile control could be. Ava, he said, voice steady but respectful. It's been a long time since we last spoke. Ava turned slightly toward the screen. Her tone even. Yes, Daniel. Last time was at the Novacor Forum in Chicago. I told you I liked your airline's legacy, but not its leadership culture. Prescott nodded slowly. I remember. You told me if you ever bought it, the first thing you'd fix would be that culture. I did, Ava said softly. And here we are. Victoria sat motionless, realizing she was witnessing something far beyond a misconduct review. Her heartbeat thudded faintly in her ears. Everything she'd been trained to manage protocol, hierarchy, deference was suddenly irrelevant. Prescott continued, turning his tone toward professionalism. Captain Bolton is on site. Victoria swallowed. Yeah, sir. He's in the operations corridor. Bring him in, Prescott said. Now. Victoria stood and stepped into the hall. Through the glass, she could see Bolton pacing, phone in hand, jaw tight. She opened the door. "Captain Bolton, Mr. Prescott wants to speak with you." Bolton turned sharply. "What for?" "I've already filed my preliminary report. Now, Richard." Her tone left no room for argument. He followed her back into the lounge, the click of his shoes sharp against the tile. When he saw the screen, his expression softened into respect, the kind reserved for the man who signed his paychecks. "Mr. Prescott." "Good afternoon," Bolton began, straightening his uniform. "I can explain the situation." "Sit down," Prescott interrupted, calm but absolute. Bolton obeyed, confusion flickering across his face. Prescott leaned forward slightly on the video feed. "Captain, I need you to listen very carefully. The passenger involved in your situation, Ava Morgan, is not only a guest on your flight. She's the new controlling owner of Aurora Air." The words landed with the quiet violence of truth. For a second, no one moved. Bolton blinked once, then again, as if trying to process a language he'd never heard before. He started, then stopped. His throat worked uselessly. "That's impossible." Ava finally looked at him, her expression calm but mercilessly clear. "It's not impossible, Captain. Just inconvenient." He stared at her, speechless. The color drained from his face. "You own the airline." She nodded once. 70%, to be precise, through Novacor Holdings. The paperwork was finalized yesterday morning. Bolton leaned back, as if distance might soften the blow. His hands trembled slightly on his knees. "I didn't know," he said, voice cracking. "If I had known, you would have poured the champagne yourself," Ava asked quietly. The question wasn't cruel. It was surgical. It didn't accuse. It exposed. Bolton's mouth opened, then closed again. His authority, his certainty, all of it had evaporated, leaving behind only habit and shame. Prescott broke the silence. "Captain Bolton, effective immediately. You are suspended pending review. Do not contact crew or staff. Victoria will handle your exit." Bolton didn't respond. He sat still, staring at nothing, the reality too large to fit inside his pride. When he finally stood, it was slow, mechanical. "Ms. Morgan," he said, almost a whisper. I know," she said. "That's the problem." He left the room without another word. Victoria remained standing, her eyes moving between the screen and Ava. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Ava replied gently. "Just learn." Prescott nodded from the screen. "Ms. Morgan, I want to formally apologize on behalf of the board, the company, and myself. I had no idea this was how we greeted our owner." Ava's voice was calm, almost kind. "Then I'd suggest you start finding out how we greet everyone else." Prescott nodded once, humbled. "We'll convene an immediate review. Full audit, culture, training, reporting lines, everything. I already planned on it," Ava said. "But now, I think it'll begin today." The call ended. The screen went dark, leaving only their reflections against the glass. Two women standing in the echo of a truth that had rearranged their world. Victoria turned to Ava, still half in disbelief. "You really meant it," she said quietly. "When you told me you fixed broken systems." Ava reached into her bag and handed her a small black card mat, minimalist, embossed only with 2 lines. "Ava Morgan, founder and CEO, Novacor Technologies." Victoria stared at it for a long moment. The symbol of power was barely the size of her palm, yet it carried more weight than any uniform she'd ever worn. Ava spoke once more, her tone even but resolute. "You have good instincts, Victoria. Keep them. They'll matter when this company starts to remember what accountability feels like. Then she turned and walked toward the glass doors, leaving the echo of her words behind. Outside, the morning light was brighter now, cutting across the marble floor like a clean slate. For the first time that day, the system didn't feel untouchable anymore. It felt human, and that meant it could change. The video feed glowed softly on the screen in the conference room. No music, no narration, just the quiet hum of a machine revealing what people had chosen not to see. Victoria pressed play. The camera's angle was fixed, watching the first-class cabin from above like an impartial witness. The scene unfolded slowly, Captain Bolton entering the cabin, shoulders straight, smile professional. He shook hands with Charles Whitmore in 1C, leaned down to greet Eleanor Brooks in 1D, even joked with the flight attendant over a bottle of champagne. Then came the moment of silence, the point where he turned towards seat 2A. For a fraction of a second, he hesitated, eyes narrowing just slightly as he looked at Ava, and then he kept walking. No greeting, no nod, not even acknowledgement that she existed. Victoria's pen stopped tapping. Ava said nothing. Her expression remained unreadable, eyes fixed on the screen. She didn't need to explain what they were seeing. The evidence spoke its own language, one older than policy, one written in habit and hierarchy. Bolton shifted in his seat across the table, his jaw tightening. "This doesn't prove anything," he muttered. "I was simply moving through the cabin." "That's not keep watching," Ava said quietly. The footage continued. The passengers settled in. The flight attendant approached Ava's seat, then turned away to attend another. Minutes passed, small enough to seem insignificant until you realized they were the kind of moments people build reputations on. Then came the confrontation. Ava stood, calm but firm. Bolton blocked her way, face set, voice sharp. The camera had no sound at first, only movement, but the tension was visible. He reached for her phone, his hand swinging wider than he intended. The impact was unmistakable. Ava's head turned slightly from the contact. Her phone hit the aisle. The playback stopped there, the frozen image cutting through the room. No one spoke. Finally, Daniel Prescott exhaled, long and low. "That's enough," he said. "I've seen what I need to see." Bolton looked between them, disbelief and anger mixing in his voice. "It was an accident. I told you. She was recording me without consent. And I reacted. I was trying to protect the company from a PR stunt." "Protect it," Ava repeated softly, turning toward him. By hitting a passenger, Bolton's face reddened. "You don't understand how these things work. I've been with Aurora Air 30 years. I've seen passengers push boundaries, looking for lawsuits, free upgrades." "Stop," Prescott said, cutting him off. His voice was calm, but the edge was unmistakable. "Richard, you've just assaulted the owner of this company, and the footage confirms it. There's nothing left to debate." Bolton stood abruptly. "You think this is about race? About optics?" "I was following procedure. Look at her. She didn't even look like a first-class passenger." Victoria froze. She had heard that tone before, the tone that wrapped prejudice in professionalism. Ava didn't raise her voice. "What does a first-class passenger look like to you?" Captain Bolton hesitated. "You know what I mean. We have a standard, an image." "An image," Ava repeated. "Yes. You mean white, male, tailored suit, silver watch, the kind you're comfortable serving champagne to." Bolton swallowed. "You're twisting my words." "No," she said. "I'm translating them." For a moment, no one moved. Even Prescott seemed caught between the silence and the weight of what was being dismantled in front of him. Ava leaned forward slightly, her voice measured. "The problem isn't that you didn't know who I was, Captain. The problem is that you didn't care who I was. You didn't have to, because in your version of Aurora Air, people like me don't belong in seat 2A unless we're serving the drinks." Bolton's eyes flickered anger, shame, maybe fear. She continued, "If you had known I owned this airline, you'd have treated me differently. That tells me everything about how you treat everyone else. The uniform doesn't make you a professional, Captain. The way you treat the powerless does." The words landed quietly, without triumph, but with the precision of truth. Victoria felt the air shift in the room, like a balance that had been slightly off for years had just found its center. Prescott straightened his tie, his face set in that corporate neutrality that only barely concealed unease. "Captain Bolton, you're officially suspended from duty effective immediately. Pending a full investigation, security will escort you from the premises." Bolton turned toward him, incredulous. "You can't be serious. Daniel, you're going to take her word over mine." "It's not her word," Prescott said. "It's your company's camera." The captain's shoulders slumped. For the first time in 30 years, no one in the room deferred to him. His rank meant nothing now. His years of command couldn't save him from the truth he'd ignored. He looked at Ava one last time. "You set me up," he said bitterly. "You planned this." Ava met his gaze, her tone almost gentle. "No, Captain. You did." He stared at her, searching for something defiance, guilt, anything to hang on to. But Ava's calm was impenetrable, the kind of calm that doesn't need to win, only to reveal. Security entered quietly. Bolton didn't resist. He walked out of the room with the slow, stiff gait of a man trying to preserve dignity that had already left the building. When the door closed behind him, the silence returned. Victoria turned to Ava. "You could have told us from the start who you were," she said softly. Ava looked out the window, where a jet was taxiing across the morning runway, its silver body glinting in sunlight. "If I had," she said, "none of you would have seen the truth. You would have seen the title, not the problem." Prescott nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful now. "You've made your point," he said. "It's not my point," Ava replied. "It's your company's reflection. You just never looked long enough to see it." Victoria closed her laptop, her movements slower now, more deliberate. "What will you do next?" Ava stood, pulling her hoodie sleeve down to cover the faint mark on her wrist. "What I came here to do," she said. "Fix the system that built men like him." As she walked toward the door, Prescott called after her. "Ms. Morgan, I hope you realize this will be public." "The press will, I know," Ava interrupted, turning slightly. "Let them see it. Maybe they'll learn something, too." She walked out into the corridor, where the noise of the airport returned boarding calls, rolling luggage, laughter. The world went on, unaware that somewhere inside its machinery, something had shifted. Ava didn't smile, but there was a quiet steadiness in her stride, the kind that comes not from victory, but from knowing you've exposed the truth without ever raising your voice. Power doesn't change people, she thought as the automatic doors opened to the sunlight. It reveals them. And in that revelation, the balance of Aurora Air and perhaps something larger had finally begun to turn. The morning after the confrontation, the building that housed Aurora Air's headquarters looked different, though nothing in its glass or steel had changed. Perhaps it was the way people moved through the lobby slower, uncertain or the quiet hum that replaced the usual chatter. Word had traveled faster than any press release the new owner had been struck by her own pilot. In the top-floor boardroom, sunlight spilled across a long walnut table. At one end sat Ava Morgan, hair pulled back, her demeanor unchanged from the woman in jeans and a hoodie the day before. Only now, she wasn't just a passenger. She was the future of the airline. Daniel Prescott entered with a folder tucked under his arm, his face lined with fatigue. Victoria Hale followed, holding a tablet full of data she hadn't yet dared to open. They exchanged brief nods before taking their seats. Ava spoke first. "Let's begin." Her tone was quiet but final. No preamble, no ceremony. She clicked her pen once and opened a notebook filled with neatly written notes. Not emotional recollections, but bullet points, observations, plans. "The incident yesterday isn't about one man," she said. "It's about what we tolerate when we call something standard. Captain Bolton didn't act alone. He acted exactly as the culture around him allowed." Prescott adjusted his tie. "Ms. Morgan, the board is ready to issue a public apology. Suspend the captain." And Ava interrupted gently. "That's surface management. Daniel, I'm interested in route repair." Victoria glanced at her tablet, scrolling through the internal reports she'd pulled overnight. "You'll find the roots run deep," she said quietly. "I know," Ava replied. "That's why we're going to start digging." She laid out her plan with the calm precision of someone accustomed to turning crisis into architecture. "First," she said, "we open an independent audit of every discrimination or bias complaint filed in the last 5 years. No exceptions, no sealed settlements. I want names, outcomes, patterns." Prescott frowned. Some of those cases were resolved through non-disclosure agreements. Reopening them could expose the company to legal transparency isn't exposure, Ava said. It's disinfectant. The room fell silent again. "Second," she continued, "we're instituting mandatory anti-bias training across all frontline roles pilots, flight attendants, gate agents, even corporate staff. Real programs, not check-the-box webinars. I want live sessions with accountability metrics." Victoria looked up. "You'll get resistance from the unions. Then we'll start with leadership," Ava said. "People follow examples, not memos." She turned another page. "Third, we're changing the way we handle passenger complaints. No more quiet settlements. No more NDAs to hide the problem. If someone reports discrimination, it will be logged, reviewed, and publicly acknowledged. We won't buy silence anymore." Prescott rubbed his temple. "You're dismantling decades of procedure." "I'm redesigning them," she corrected softly. "There's a difference." The boardroom clock ticked, filling the space between her words. "Finally," Ava said, "we'll establish a passenger advocacy office. It will operate independently, reporting directly to me and Victoria. Any employee or passenger who experiences bias will have a direct line not to PR, not to HR, but to decision makers." Victoria nodded slowly. "The idea landing like oxygen in a sealed room. You're turning a single incident into a structural overhaul." Ava looked at her. "That's the only way change lasts." For a moment, Prescott said nothing. He looked out through the window at the airfield below lines of planes, silver under the morning sun, waiting for permission to move. "You're going to make enemies," he said finally. Ava smiled faintly. "Then at least I'll know which side they're on." Outside, the distant whine of a departing jet vibrated through the glass, a reminder of how far sound travels even when you don't raise your voice. By noon, internal memos were circulating through every department. The subject line read Immediate Operational Review Directive from owner Ava Morgan. Some employees read it with curiosity, some with disbelief. A few smiled quietly, privately, because they'd waited years for someone higher up to notice what they'd been whispering all along. At Gate B-17 Elliott Ward, the flight attendant who had watched the incident unfold saw the notice appear on his screen. He read it twice, exhaling slowly. For the first time, he felt the company's silence breaking. In the maintenance hangar, mechanics paused their work to read it aloud. In call centers, agents exchanged looks over their headsets. Across Aurora Air, people who had long believed that bias was too big to touch suddenly realized it had a name, and that name now sat at the head of the table. Late that afternoon, Ava and Victoria stood by the wide windows overlooking the runway. The sun had begun to dip, turning the tarmac gold. Victoria broke the silence. "You really meant it," she said softly. "When you said you fixed broken systems?" Ava smiled without turning. "Systems are just habits in uniform. Once you see the habit, you can change the uniform." "I've worked here 20 years. Victoria said. "We always talked about diversity and inclusion, posters, slogans, but no one ever put structure behind it. You just did in one morning." Ava looked out at the sky, where another jet lifted from the ground, banking gracefully into the distance. "It shouldn't take a slap for people to notice the imbalance," she said. "But sometimes pain opens, the only door people refuse to see." Her voice softened, almost to herself. Anger would have been easy, she thought. But anger ends the moment it's expressed. Change begins when it's contained. Behind her, Victoria's phone buzzed another message from Prescott. Another round of corporate concern. Ava didn't turn. She already knew the rhythm of resistance, first denial, then discomfort, then eventual agreement once the world applauds. She had no interest in applause. "I'm not doing this for headlines," Ava said, her tone even. "I'm doing it so that the next woman sitting in seat 2A, whoever she is, doesn't have to justify her existence before she's served a glass of water." Victoria nodded. "Then this isn't just your story. It's the company's reckoning." Ava finally turned toward her. "Good. Let it be both." The sky outside shifted to twilight, streaks of orange melting into gray. Somewhere, a new crew boarded a flight under stricter eyes, new rules beginning to take shape. Change. Ava knew. Never arrived with applause. It arrived in silence, in the subtle rearrangement of conscience, in the quiet discomfort of those learning to see. As they left the boardroom, Victoria glanced back at the empty chairs. "You know," she said, "they'll call this the Ava Morgan policy." Ava smiled faintly. "No," she said, "they'll just call it fair." She stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut with a soft chime. Outside, night had settled over the airport, but for the first time in years, something inside Aurora Air felt awake. Justice doesn't always roar, Ava thought as the elevator descended. Sometimes it rewrites the manual. The first call came early 7:42 Mum. The morning light had barely touched the windows of Ava's office when the phone on her desk began to hum. The number flashing across the screen wasn't familiar, but the name was Colin Barrett, president of the Aurora Air Pilots Association. 40 years in aviation, 20 in union politics, and famous for his booming voice on cable news when the dignity of the profession was in question. Ava picked up, "Good morning, Mr. Barrett." The pause on the other end was brief but weighted. "Ms. Morgan," he said finally, tone polite but tight. "I suppose congratulations are in order. Quite the way to announce a new owner national news overnight." "I didn't plan it that way," Ava said. "But sometimes The truth doesn't ask for timing. Barrett exhaled, the sound of someone shifting from courtesy to negotiation. I'll be direct. The union strongly objects to the immediate suspension of Captain Richard Bolton. We see it as a breach of due process. He's a decorated pilot, spotless safety record, and he struck a passenger. Ava interrupted softly. Barrett hesitated, recalibrating. There's context. Of course, there always is. Emotions run high in flight situations. You've got to understand. Our captains are trained to maintain authority in confined environments. Authority, Ava said, not assault. He went quiet for a moment, with respect. You're not a pilot, Ms. Morgan. You may not understand the pressures. She leaned back in her chair. You're right, she said evenly. I'm not a pilot. I'm just the woman he hit. The silence that followed was total. She could almost hear him swallow. His voice tripped on itself. You're that passenger. Yes, Ava said simply. Seat 2A. For a moment, all that reached her through the line was breath. Then Barrett's voice softened. The sharp edge is gone. I see, he said quietly. I didn't realize. You weren't meant to, Ava said. That's part of the problem. When the call ended, she set the phone down without satisfaction. Power wasn't the point. Clarity was. And clarity always arrived like light through glass cold, unflinching, impossible to argue with once seen. By afternoon, the story had broken wider than she expected. A clip from a conservative news channel played across every terminal screen in the building Captain Bolton's face, framed in sympathetic lighting, seated in front of a polished oak backdrop. He spoke calmly, almost mournfully. I've given 30 years of my life to that airline, he said to the anchor. Now I'm being painted as some kind of villain because I enforced order in my cabin. This is what happens when political agendas replace merit. They call it diversity. I call it discrimination against experience. The anchor nodded with performative gravity, and you feel you're being punished for being who you are. Bolton smiled sadly. Let's just say, in today's climate, some people are untouchable, and the rest of us, we're easy headlines. In the background, the banner read, Veteran Pilot Speaks Out Victim of the Diversity Agenda. At Aurora's headquarters, employees watched in the cafeteria. Some shook their heads. Some looked away. Some murmured that it was complicated. But in the quiet corner by the window, Victoria Hale stood alone, her coffee forgotten, her jaw tight. She'd seen this movie before a man turns his consequences into a crusade, and suddenly, accountability becomes persecution. In her office upstairs, Ava watched the same segment. She didn't frown. She didn't sigh. She just let it play until the end, the screen reflecting in her calm eyes. He's not fighting me, she thought. He's fighting the world that no longer lets him be right by default. Her phone buzzed again. Messages from reporters, legal teams, board members asking if she'd make a statement. She didn't. The silence was deliberate. Every headline Bolton built on outrage would dissolve the moment his narrative met the video evidence and documented complaints. Truth didn't need to shout. It just needed patience. That evening, the conference room was fuller than before. Department heads, communications advisors, union liaisons, all waiting for her direction. Prescott looked uneasy, caught between crisis management and disbelief. We're under pressure, he said. They're calling it overreach. The pilots' union wants reinstatement hearings. Social media's split, half calling you a hero, half saying you're staging a purge. Ava nodded. Good, she said. It means we're touching something real. Prescott blinked. That's an optimistic way to put it. It's the only way to put it, she said. You don't reform a culture without hearing it scream first. Victoria glanced at her notes. Do you want to respond to the TV interviews? No, Ava said. Let them talk. One of the PR managers frowned. With respect, silence looks like weakness. Alva looked at him steadily. Silence looks like composure to people who value truth. To everyone else, it looks like power they can't provoke. The room quieted. It wasn't defiance in her tone. It was certainty. Bolton has his narrative, she said. Let him keep it. We have facts. The footage, the reports, the passenger statements, and the record of complaints filed under his name. The difference between stories and evidence is time. Let time do the talking. Victoria met her eyes across the table, and when the headlines turned hostile, Ava's lips curved faintly. Then we'll keep doing the work. Systems aren't changed by applause or approval. She stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Tomorrow, we continue with the internal audit. Send the first memo to all staff about the new passenger advocacy office. Make it public. Let them see we're not hiding. Prescott hesitated. You really don't care about optics, do you? Ava turned to him, her voice gentle but unyielding. Optics are what built the problem. Daniel. Everyone looked polished while they ignored the rot underneath. As she left the room, Victoria watched her go, that calm, measured stride that carried the weight of reform without the sound of it. She realized something, then Ava wasn't fighting a man. She was dismantling a pattern. That night, the newsroom lights burned late across the city, feeding the cycle of speculation. But inside her apartment, Ava sat alone by the window, the city below flickering like static. She wasn't watching the skyline. She was thinking about the quiet middle, the people who'd never make the news, but would feel the effects of what she was building. Every change starts with a name they call foolish, she thought, until it becomes the rule they quote later. Her phone buzzed one last time, a message from Victoria. Internal support is arising. Even some pilots are thanking you quietly. The silence is breaking. Ava smiled faintly, typing only 2 words in reply. Let it. Then she set the phone down and looked out again at the horizon. Somewhere in the darkness, another plane crossed the night sky, steady, purposeful, unshaken by the turbulence below. By the time the auditorium filled, there wasn't a seat left empty. Pilots in uniform, flight attendants in pressed Navy suits, ground staff with name badges still clipped to their collars, all gathered in the headquarters atrium, beneath a banner that read simply, Aurora Airtown Hall, Building a Fairer Sky. It wasn't a slogan. Ava had insisted on the words building and fairer because she believed both implied work, not a promise, not perfection, but effort. The room quieted as she walked onto the small stage. No dramatic music, no lights dimmed. She didn't want a production, just truth, plain and visible. Good morning, she began, her voice steady, warm but controlled. I'm Ava Morgan. Most of you already know that by now. But before last week, I was just another face in seat 2A. There were small, nervous laughs around the room, but they faded quickly. The silence afterward wasn't discomfort. It was curiosity. I came here as a passenger to see what our company feels like from the other side, she said, and I learned more in 2 hours than I could have learned in 2 years from reports. She let that settle, then clicked the small remote in her hand. The large screen behind her lit up with a clean, white slide. Bias-related complaints. 2018-2023. Bars rose from left to right, each taller than the one before. Blue, then red, then gray, a pattern impossible to ignore. In the last 5 years, she said, complaints involving bias or discrimination rose by nearly 40%, but less than 15% were ever categorized as such. The rest, she pointed to the lower section of the chart, were labeled customer dissatisfaction or service dispute. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some leaned forward, others folded their arms. That, she continued, is not a reflection of bad people. It's a reflection of blind systems we built, often without realizing whom they were built to serve. Victoria Hale stood near the back, watching the room as faces shifted, some defensive, others introspective. She recognized the look. It was the first tremor of self-awareness in a place used to authority. Ava turned another slide. This one listed 3 clear commitments in bold white text. 1. Review all service protocols to remove bias points. 2. Mandatory anti-bias and empathy training across all departments. 3. Launch of a protected reporting channel for any employee or passenger experiencing discrimination. Each point appeared simple, almost bureaucratic, but the meaning behind them was anything but. These are not initiatives, Ava said. They're corrections. Every passenger, every employee deserves the same respect at 30,000 feet as they do on the ground. A hand went up near the front row, a man in a pilot's jacket, his voice deep and firm. Captain Joseph Tanner, 27 years with Aurora. He said, "I've flown with Richard Bolton. One mistake shouldn't erase a lifetime of service. He's not a bad man." A murmur of agreement spread through a portion of the room. Others nodded quietly. It was a fair question, one she'd been waiting for. Ava looked at him, not unkindly. "You're right, Captain Tanner," she said. "No one's defined by one mistake." Then she tapped the remote again. The next slide appeared a list of anonymized internal reports, each labeled with case numbers and dates. At the bottom of the list, a name stood out in faint, italic text: Captain Richard Bolton, referenced in 7 prior incidents unsubstantiated. A ripple passed through the room, shock, then silence. Ava didn't raise her voice. "This isn't one mistake," she said. "It's 7 opportunities we ignored." The words fell like measured drops of water. Not anger, but gravity. Every time a complaint was downgraded, we told the victim they misread the moment. Every time someone used their rank to shield their behavior, we told the rest of the crew that silence was safer than honesty. No one spoke now. Even Tanner lowered his eyes. Ava took a slow breath. "I'm not here to shame anyone, but I won't pretend this culture appeared out of thin air. It was built, and it can be rebuilt." From the middle rows, a flight attendant, a young woman with a neat bun and tired eyes, raised her hand. "I remember filing a report once," she said softly. "A passenger called me names I can't repeat here. My supervisor told me to let it go so we wouldn't lose the client." Another voice joined from the side. "Same thing happened to me," said a man in a ground crew jacket. "They said it wasn't discrimination, just a misunderstanding." Then another, and another. One by one, voices filled the room, not shouting, not accusing, but releasing years of held breath. The air seemed to shift, dense with stories that had waited too long to be heard. Victoria watched from the back, blinking rapidly. She'd been in countless company meetings, but none like this. This wasn't a forum. It was a reckoning. Ava let the room breathe before speaking again. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Every story shared today matters more than any press release we'll ever issue. I promise you this time, it won't be ignored." She looked out at the faces, men and women of every background, rank, and history, and thought how strange it was, that truth, once spoken aloud, didn't divide, but clarified. This is what rebuilding looks like, she thought. Not applause, not slogans, just people finally seeing each other without the uniforms. When the meeting ended, there was no standing ovation, just quiet conversations, small clusters of employees exchanging glances that said, "Maybe now we can talk about it." Victoria approached the stage as the crowd thinned. "You realize," she said softly, "you just changed the temperature of this company." Ava smiled faintly. "Then it's finally thawing." "Some people will fight it," Victoria warned. "They already are," Ava said. "But that's all right. Resistance means it's real." As they walked toward the exit, Ava glanced back at the empty chairs. For the first time since she'd bought the Airline, she didn't see a company. She saw people raw, uncertain, learning to face the truth together. Outside, the afternoon sun filtered through the lobby windows, catching her reflection in the glass. She studied it briefly, not as the woman who'd been hit, or the CEO who'd taken control, but as a mirror of everyone inside, flawed, determined, capable of change. The hardest part of reform isn't writing policy, she thought. It's rewriting the story people tell themselves about who they are. And in that moment, she knew the story of Aurora Air had finally begun to change not through punishment, but through understanding. The first post appeared on a quiet Sunday morning. It was from a former flight attendant, a woman who had left Aurora Air 2 years earlier. She wrote a few short lines on her social media page. No hashtags, no anger, just a story. "I once flew under Captain Bolton. It began. He never shouted, never cursed, but he had a way of making it clear who belonged and who didn't. Once, he asked me to move a black mother and her son from first class to the back, saying the seats must have been booked by mistake. I didn't forget that day. Within hours, others followed. Crew members, retired pilots, even a gate agent from Dallas who remembered how Bolton had insisted certain passengers fit the brand image better. None of them sounded vengeful. They sounded tired, as if they had carried the weight of silence too long. By evening, the posts had become a thread, then a headline, then a story on every major network. Ex-crew members speak out on Aurora Air's former captain. And for the first time, the narrative shifted not because Ava spoke, but because truth finally spoke for itself. At headquarters, Victoria Hale scrolled through her phone, reading the posts. Her office window reflected the same gray sky that hung over Harbor City. But she felt something different in the air, not chaos, not scandal, but release. The company had stopped holding its breath. Down the hall, Daniel Prescott was on a conference call with the legal department. Bolton's attorney had been aggressive for weeks, threatening a defamation suit, claiming emotional distress, painting his client as the victim of a political agenda. But the evidence, camera footage, internal memos, historical complaints grew too thick to maneuver through. By the end of the week, the lawsuit began to shrink in scope, then in tone, then in relevance. What had started as a potential corporate nightmare was dissolving under the light of consistency. When the facts line up, even the loudest voices run out of air. Ava sat at the long conference table, listening quietly as the lawyers summarized. Their case is collapsing. One said, "They're asking if we'd consider a non-disparagement settlement." Ava shook her head gently. "No settlements. No silence, just truth." The lawyer hesitated. "That's unusual for corporate handling." "Then maybe it's time we make unusual the new normal," she said. There was no triumph in her voice, only conviction. Justice isn't a performance, she thought. It's maintenance. 2 weeks later, Aurora Air released a public statement not polished by PR consultants, not drenched in legal caution, just a clear, factual account of what had happened, what had been done, and what would change. The statement was signed by Ava Morgan, owner and chairwoman, and co-signed by Victoria Hale, COO. It acknowledged the harm, detailed the reforms, and ended with a simple line: respect is not a reward for status. It is the boarding pass for everyone. The public reaction was unlike anything the media expected. Instead of boycotts, the company saw support. Passengers praised the transparency. Travel blogs wrote about the new Aurora culture. A retired journalist tweeted, "They didn't bury it. They faced it." That's rare these days. Bookings began to rise. Customer satisfaction scores long stagnant climbed. Even job applications increased. Many from people who said they wanted to work for a company that owned its mistakes and learned from them. Victoria walked into Ava's office with a printout of the latest metrics. "We're up 12% in positive brand sentiment," she said, half in disbelief. It turns out, accountability sells. Ava smiled slightly. Integrity always had a market. She said, "We just forgot to list it." That evening, as the building emptied, Ava lingered by the window overlooking the airfield. The lights along the runways blinked in slow rhythm one by one, steady and measured, like breaths returning after a long suffocation. She thought about all the years corporations spent avoiding scandal, polishing surfaces while rot spread beneath. Avoidance is decay in disguise, she reflected. You don't save a brand by hiding its flaws. You save it by showing it has a conscience. Her phone buzzed with a message from Victoria, a photo of a new employee orientation session. On the projector screen behind the speaker, the slide read, "Aurora Air Building Fair, Skies Together." Beneath it, in smaller print, were 3 principles: equity, empathy, excellence. She replied with just one word: progress. Across town, in a small cafe that smelled of rain and espresso, a group of former employees sat together, some who had spoken publicly, others who hadn't. They talked about their years at Aurora, about Bolton, about the moments they'd stayed silent. There was no bitterness, only a quiet relief. One of them, a middle-aged black flight attendant named Regina, said softly, "I didn't think anyone up there would ever listen." Another replied, "She didn't just listen. She changed what listening means." When the next quarterly report came out, Prescott presented it to the board. The numbers were better than anyone anticipated, profits up modestly, brand trust up significantly, attrition down. The real headline wasn't financial, it was cultural. Aurora Air had survived what most airlines couldn't, a moral crisis, and emerged stronger. One board member, gray-haired and skeptical, leaned back in his chair. "So you're saying calling out racism improved the bottom line?" Ava met his eyes calmly. "I'm saying pretending it doesn't exist almost destroyed it." There was no further argument. Weeks later, when Captain Bolton finally issued a public apology drafted by lawyers, measured, cautious, it barely made the news. The world had moved on. Aurora Air had become a different story, one about transformation, not scandal. And as for Ava, she didn't watch the interview. She didn't need to. She knew some lessons come only after silence becomes too heavy to bear. Late one evening, she walked through the terminal of Orion International Airport, the same terminal where it all began. The crowds moved easily, boarding passes scanning, announcements echoing softly overhead. No one recognized her. She liked it that way. At one gate, a young attendant knelt to help an elderly passenger with her bag. The woman thanked her, The attendant smiled, unhurried. Small gestures, unnoticed by most, but these were the real indicators of change. Ava paused for a moment, watching the scene. This is how culture shifts, she thought, not through policies or press conferences, but through one quiet act of decency repeated until it becomes habit. As she turned to leave, a voice over the intercom announced Aurora Air Flight 481 to Seattle. Now boarding. She stopped briefly, smiled at the coincidence, then kept walking. Outside, planes lined the runway under the fading light. Engines hummed like low thunder, steady, patient, alive. And somewhere above the noise, higher than altitude or rank, hovered the quiet truth Ava had proven to the world. Facing injustice never damages the brand. Pretending it isn't there always does. 6 months passed, and the air around Aurora Air felt different. The scandal that once consumed headlines had settled into history, replaced by something rarer respect. That morning, the new logo gleamed above the gates at Solace Bay International Airport, a silver wing streaked with bands of color, subtle yet deliberate. Each hue represented a story the people who built, flew, served, and trusted the airline. It was not a marketing choice. It was a confession that had evolved into a promise. Ava Morgan stood on the observation deck. Her reflection caught in the glass beside the symbol. The tailored Navy pilot uniform fit neatly, its insignia new, its weight familiar. She had spent the past months completing the full internal training required for captains not as a gesture, but as discipline. Now, she would command Aurora Air Flight 1001 Solace Bay to Harbor City, the same route that once began it all. Inside the terminal, cameras clicked, but she ignored them. The announcement over the loudspeaker carried her name in the same even tone as any other captain's. That's how it should sound, she thought. Ordinary, normal, equal. The cabin doors of Flight 1001 opened to a cross-section of the world. First class no longer looked like a curated photograph. It looked like humanity itself, a middle-aged black couple in travel sweaters, an elderly Asian woman reading a gardening magazine, a young man in work boots, a white mother with her toddler, and 2 business travelers already tapping on laptops. The uniforms of the crew gleamed, but so did their ease. Every greeting sounded unforced. From the cockpit window, the view of the tarmac shimmered beneath the rising sun. Ava adjusted her headset. Aurora 10, 01 ready for clearance, she said evenly. Her co-pilot, a young woman named Sophia Tran, repeated the call. When the tower cleared them for takeoff, Ava guided the plane forward, steady, unhurried. As the engines built their rhythm, she glanced at the row of faces behind the glass, the passengers who no longer had to question whether they belonged there. Outside the terminal, at the edge of the viewing platform, Richard Bolton stood alone. No uniform now, just a gray jacket and a cap pulled low. He had come quietly, early, before the crowd gathered. His suspension had become retirement, not by formal decision, but by erosion of relevance. The lawsuit was gone, the interviews forgotten. He watched as the jet rolled toward the runway, silver wing flashing against the light. The emblem on the tail caught the morning sun, a reminder and a reversal. Once, he had believed he defined the brand. Now, the brand defined the lesson he'd refused to learn. For a moment, as the engines thundered, his reflection trembled in the glass, superimposed over the plane. Then the aircraft lifted, graceful and decisive, carrying his past into the sky. Inside the cockpit, Ava felt the faint press of gravity ease as they climbed. The coastline unfolded below a silver line against blue. Sophia smiled beside her. "Beautiful day for a first flight," she said. Ava nodded. "Every day looks beautiful when it starts clean." In the cabin, the hum of conversation rose softly. The flight attendants moved with quiet confidence, offering coffee and water, addressing each passenger by name. No one was first in treatment, only in seat number. Row 2A sat empty. Ava had insisted on it staying that way, not as nostalgia, but as space for memory. From the flight deck camera, it looked ordinary, unremarkable. Exactly right, she thought. It doesn't need to be remembered to have mattered. Halfway through the flight, the intercom chimed. Ava's voice filled the cabin calm, measured. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard Aurora Flight 1001. We're cruising at 34,000 feet. And if you look to your left, you'll see the Cascades catching the first light of the day. It's good to have you with us." A pause, brief but meaningful. "Every person on this flight represents the sky. We've built one where everyone has room to rise." Then silence again. No applause. Just a few passengers looking up, thoughtful. At the terminal in Harbor City, ground crews stood waiting in crisp uniforms, the new emblem stitched above their hearts. Cameras waited too, but not for scandal, for a milestone. When the jet touched down, it did so smoothly, like an exhale. As the doors opened, passengers disembarked smiling, unaware that history had quietly completed a circle. On the tarmac, Victoria Hale stood watching the plane taxi in. She'd flown separately, preferring to greet Ava as CEO rather than friend. When Ava stepped down the mobile stairs, helmet tucked under her arm, Victoria said softly, "You did it?" Ava smiled. "No, we did?" Victoria glanced toward the observation deck, where a lone figure had already turned to leave. "He was here," she murmured. Ava followed her gaze but didn't comment. Some endings didn't need dialogue. They just needed distance. Reporters approached, microphones poised, but Ava waved them off with a small, polite gesture. "Today's not about a headline," she said. "It's about a takeoff." Later, in a quiet corner of the terminal, she removed her pilot cap and placed it on the table beside her. The metal gleamed faintly, a symbol of skill earned, not inherited. She thought of the months before, the storm of doubt and noise, the endless meetings and the silent courage of those who spoke up. None of it felt grand now. It just felt necessary. Dignity isn't a statement, she thought. It's a discipline. Outside the window, the Aurora Air banner fluttered gently in the wind, the silver wing catching light, the colored bands rippling like a promise renewed. In another part of the terminal, a child pressed his hand to the glass, watching planes ascend. His mother smiled, pointing at the sky. "See that one that's Aurora Air? They say their new captain helped change everything." The boy squinted upward. "She, yes," the mother said. "She." The child watched the fading contrail, and something quiet but hopeful settled in the air. That night, as twilight bled into the Pacific, Ava walked along the observation deck again. Below her, a single plane took off, its silver wing reflecting the last light. For a moment, she saw her own reflection merged with the aircraft, two outlines in motion, one grounded, one ascending. She thought of all the hands that had lifted the company from wreckage, the ones who spoke up, the ones who listened, and even those who resisted before understanding. It was never about winning. She realized it was about teaching the sky to be wide enough for everyone. The engines roared faintly in the distance, then dissolved into silence. Ava closed her eyes, letting the sound fade into memory. Somewhere below, Richard Bolton walked away from the terminal for the last time. Above him, her plane climbed through clear air, steady, bright, and free, and in that quiet balance between earth and sky, Aurora Air finally became what it was meant to be: a company and a story that learned how to rise without leaving anyone behind. In the months that followed, the story of Aurora Air settled into the quiet pages of business journals and leadership studies. News anchors had moved on, social feeds had cooled, and the public had turned its gaze elsewhere. Yet inside the company, something permanent had taken root. Not a new rule book, but a new instinct. At first glance, the fall of Captain Richard Bolton had looked like a single man's failure, the kind of headline that burns bright and fades. But as time stretched, it became clear that he was never the whole story. He was a symptom, not the cause, the visible crack in a system built to favor image over integrity. Aurora Air had not been cruel by design. It had simply been blind by habit. Like so many corporations before it, it believed that efficiency and elegance could substitute for empathy, that the right logo, the right uniform, the right tone of voice could stand in for moral gravity. It took one woman sitting in seat 2A, silent and unassuming, to prove how thin that illusion really was. Ava Morgan understood that from the beginning. She hadn't come onto that flight to expose anyone. She came to experience what her passengers felt: unseen, ordinary, anonymous. That was the point. It was why she'd kept her ownership quiet. Because truth doesn't reveal itself when power walks into the room. It shows itself when power pretends to be absent. She could have announced who she was the moment Bolton raised his voice. She could have stopped the insult before it turned physical. But she didn't. She waited. Not out of pride, but out of discipline. She wanted the system to show its reflexes without warning. And it did, perfectly. That restraint gave her more than moral high ground. It gave her evidence, not paperwork, not spreadsheets, living proof of bias, so embedded it had become invisible. That moment in the aisle, caught on camera and in conscience, became the cornerstone for reform. From the outside, it looked like poetic justice the woman dismissed as not belonging, turning out to be the owner. But for Ava, it was never about irony. It was about diagnosis. You can't heal what you refuse to see. Sometimes, when she spoke to new recruits, she told them quietly, if I'd come in wearing the badge of my title, none of this would have happened. They would have smiled, served, and pretended. But pretense can't fix truth. It only hides it. And the truth was simple. Aurora Air's real problem wasn't one angry pilot. It was an entire culture that confused politeness with fairness. It valued comfort over conscience. It built a brand on the illusion of perfection, not the practice of equality. Ava dismantled that illusion piece by piece, not with outrage, but with procedure. She replaced private settlements with public accountability. She turned complaints into data, and data into reform. She turned silence into evidence, and evidence into change. In doing so, she proved something most executives never believe. Doing the right thing is not bad business. It's the only kind that lasts. Victoria Hale once said in a board meeting, "We've learned that integrity can be measured. You just have to decide to count it." No one argued with her. As for the passengers, they noticed too. They noticed when flight attendants no longer hesitated before defending a customer. They noticed when pilots greeted them by name, regardless of skin color, accent, or attire. They noticed when Aurora's ads stopped showing only the polished and began showing the real, the diverse, the unfiltered, the human. The company's reputation, once fragile, became something sturdier than image. It became trust. But outside the world of spreadsheets and PR statements, the story still lingered in quieter circles, told not as gossip, but as lesson. A gate agent in Chicago might tell a new hire, "Remember the Morgan flight." A flight attendant might remind a trainee, "Respect everyone. You never know who's in that seat." And somewhere, that simple truth echoed through the corridors of airports and boardrooms alike. Don't judge the passenger by the seat they sit in. The person you dismiss may own the plane. That line, originally spoken by an anonymous Aurora trainer, began to circulate online. It became a quote on posters, a headline on articles, a phrase that lived far longer than the incident itself. Ava never claimed it. She didn't need to. The lesson wasn't hers alone. Sometimes, late at night, she'd think about that morning in Solace Bay, how she had walked down the jet bridge, wearing a uniform stitched with her company's emblem. The irony still struck her, but so did the peace. She'd proven what she always believed, that power, when held quietly, reveals more truth than power declared aloud. From the beginning, Aurora Air had been a mirror. It reflected not just the people who flew with it, but the people who ran it, their fears, their values, their blind spots. It took a moment of humiliation, caught on a shaky phone camera, to turn that mirror around. The moral wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about equality in the abstract. It was about visibility, the radical act of seeing one another as human before anything else. If the world learned anything from that flight, it was this: hiding behind image will always cost more than confronting injustice. Transparency may sting, but it heals. Secrecy soothes, but it rots. In the end, Ava Morgan didn't just reform an airline. She reframed the equation between ethics and enterprise. She showed that dignity is not a threat to profit, but its foundation. And she left behind a story that would outlive the headlines. A story whispered in airport lounges and classrooms. A story that older travelers would tell with a nod and a knowing smile. The woman they thought didn't belong ended up flying the plane. From the narrator's distance, the meaning is clear. Aurora Air's fall and rise was never about a villain or a victim. It was about recognition the moment a company remembered that every policy, every protocol, every title exists to serve people, not the other way around. The sky, after all, is the great equalizer. It doesn't care about color, class, or pedigree. Up there, gravity is the only power that treats everyone the same. And those who understand that truth, those who choose reason over rage, clarity over ego, will always be the ones who rise higher, steadier, freer. Thank you for staying with us through this story. It wasn't just about power or prejudice. It was about the quiet strength of choosing wisdom over anger, dignity over pride, and fairness over fear. If this story touched something in you, please leave a like. It tells us that you believe in spreading stories that remind us of what truly matters. Share this video with someone who might need a gentle reminder. Never judge a person by how they look, because the one you underestimate may just own the whole game. And if you'd like to keep walking with us through stories of humanity, ethics, and awareness, stories that make us pause and think, please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss what comes next. Thank you for watching, for listening, and most of all, for caring. We'll see you in the next story, where together we keep learning how to be better, one story at a time.